Chapter 2 The Fateful Kweh, in which the deciding moment comes. The days passed agonizingly slowly. At dawn, Yen and the other laborers would go beyond the palisade and dig, the spring sun beating down on them as gawkers watched from the walls. Every day, Yen listened for the telltale kweh of a chocobo-drawn cart, the great yellow birds driving a merchant to and fro. Quarry Mill sat just by the main thoroughfare between the city of Gridania itself and the deserts of Thanaland to the south. Every moon or so, some money chaser from the city-state of Ul'dah would stop in to peddle some wares and rest their heads before continuing on. They were long overdue for a visit. So where were they? Yen leaned on her shovel as she stopped to catch a breath, its iron head burying into the overturned soil. The ditch was close to done, but even so there were several days of hard labor left before the task was at its end. Only the gods knew what work there would be waiting for them afterwards. Even this vital bit of construction had taken almost a year of bargaining, pleading, and even bribing the Gridanian settlers to approve. If they were lucky, some of the local farms and stables would be hard-pressed enough to take on Alamegans as cheap labor. Cheap, of course, meant near slave wages, but it'd be nothing. If they weren't lucky, then the next moon would be the worst in a long while. Yen chewed at her lip nervously. Nothing seemed to be going right. Time had decayed the realization that had stirred her into guilt and doubt. Maybe she should just abandon any silly notions of playing the hero, she thought. Could she really turn her back on everyone like that? Could she really just abandon Quarry Mill, run off to the hills like some selfish coward? Yen slumped lower and lower against her shovel, her strength sapping away. Despite the heat, she felt so deeply and terribly cold. Kweh! The sound made her head snap up, her eyes wide with shocked realization. She froze, her breathing suddenly shuddering as she listened intently. Ice ran down her spine as she waited, terribly afraid that she had imagined it. She was just as afraid that she hadn't. Kweh! And not just one. A chorus of distant bird calls filtered through the dense underbrush, signifying only one thing. A carriage was coming. 1,000 conflicting impulses fought for dominance over Yennefer's body. Part of her wanted to run to the caravan, another part desperately wanted to run away. Instead, Yen stood still, frozen in the sun, a cold sweat breaking out across her body. She was dimly aware that the others had ceased working, all eyes fixed on her as she started to slowly sink to the floor. Only Mefred's voice broke through the haze over her mind, the great bear of a man's deep timbre piercing through the panic. Yennefer? His tone, despite its inherent gruffness, was filled with concern. When she didn't reply, Mefred tried again. Yennefer! His concern was evolving into alarm. Yen tried to speak, to get anything out, to assuage the old man, but nothing escaped. By then, she had slid entirely down her shovel, her arms loosely clasped around its handle while she sat in the dry dirt. Tears filled her eyes as the sound of the carriage grew ever louder. Mefford looked down at her, arms folded against his chest, before sighing. "Take a half bell, everyone." He stood there as, slowly, the other laborers gave them room. For a long moment, neither said a word. It was Yen who broke the silence, her voice soft and trembling. "I can't stay here, Meffred." "Why not?" Meffred's response seemed halfway between a question and a statement. Yennefer looked up at him, tears beginning to streak down dirty cheeks. "Because it's just us," she answered slowly. "Because you were right, and Ralger, I never want to see what you have." Hearing his own words repeated back to him made the old warrior wince. He broke his gaze, if only for a moment. "Nothing will get better if all we do is... She struggled for words, but even their absence seemed to impact Meffred. He seemed so worn down, like a mossy statue, standing forgotten amidst the trees. "I understand," he finally said. "This place will kill all of us someday. It's good that..." Yen was on her feet as quickly as a levin bolt. "Don't you say that!" She jabbed a finger at his chest. She was moving on impulse, body acting faster than mind. "Don't you dare!" A flash of anger surged through her at his resignation. "I refuse to give up, and you shouldn't either." "Then why leave?" Mefford responded, perplexed. "Where would you go?" "Gridania." She braced for his response. "Gridania?" Mefford was beginning to raise his own voice. "Gods, girl, they'll throw you out the front gate. Do you really think they'll let one of us through their bloody doors?" "Maybe. I have to try," she shouted back. "I'm good with a spear, if I can join the Lancers Guild." "Are you mad?" Mefford exploded. "They'll turn you into another whaler bastard, like all of them on the walls." He gestured with an open palm back to the palisade and the judging faces above. The thinnest saving grace was that at least onlookers couldn't understand them. Both Yen and Mefford were speaking exclusively in Alamegan. Even so, they were making a hell of a show. "No, they won't!" Yen felt her face burn at the insinuation. I won't let them. I swear, She forced back tears, wiping her eyes indignantly. Her composure, already cracked, was beginning to fail entirely. Words were increasingly difficult to form as angry tears ran down her face. Her heart was roiling with upset at the Gridanians for the callousness, at Mefred for having so little faith in her, lastly, at herself for running away. Mefred silently watched her sob, his hand opening and closing as he tried to decide what to do. He sighed through his nose, closing his eyes in resignation, before putting his hand on her shoulder. "It's all right, lass. Just let it out." His voice was soft, as if she was a child again. She certainly felt like one, crumbling in on herself in display of gods and Gridanians alike. Mefred's hand remained until the flow began to dry, Yen pulling away to dry her eyes with her forearm. "I'll come back," Yen sniffled, blinking to clear her vision. She dimly wondered how much of a mess she must be. "I'll learn everything I can from them, and then I'll come back." "I know." Mefred's eyes looked so tired, so distant. The expression on his face was haunted, like a ghost was standing right behind Yen. Maybe 1,000 ghosts, maybe more, all crowding behind her. Yen could feel her heart grow heavier as she realized just how many times the old man must have said goodbye. Mefred looked around, slowly regaining his composure. His back was straightening, his posture closing. "I know how goodbyes are difficult," he said stiffly. "If you would like, I could make them for you." "I'd appreciate that." Yen looked down, folding her arms anxiously under her chest. She swallowed hard, feeling cold again. "Could you say goodbye to Ebba for me, too?" Mefred slowly nodded. "Of course, Yennefer." He cast a glance back at the palisade. The gawkers had dispersed, the show no longer as entertaining. A look of muted fury crossed his face before he swallowed it down. "Come on, we should head back inside. You have to pack, and 12 knows how long that cart will hang about." "Thank you," Yen whispered hoarsely. For a moment, Mefred seemed about to ask a question in reply, but only nodded. Together, the pair made for the gate, as the sound of the carriage filled the air. It didn't take long for Yen to pack. She had barely any possessions to her name, and she had been preparing to leave for a few days now besides. Everything she owned fit inside a small knapsack that she swung over her back with ease. There were only 2 possessions left that she couldn't store inside it, the first of which, obviously, were the clothes she was wearing. When Yen had turned 18 summers old, the people of Cormil had pitched in together to give her something to mark her ascent into adulthood. A white blouse, a leather bodice wrapped around her stomach, a short black skirt, and tall leather boots. It had been stitched lovingly together by hands, carefully made to be as rugged as it was pretty. Yen loved it dearly. Yen walked slowly to the exit, feeling the hair on the back of her neck stand as her fellow refugees watched her go. Had Mefred told everyone already? Or was she about to disappear without warning? The door felt so very far away, her footsteps heavy as her heart reminded her of 1,000 memories. She had been a child here, made an adult far too soon here, and now she was leaving it all behind. What would she do if Mefred was right? What could she say to make up for her? She shook her head violently, physically willing the thought away. She needed to be confident in herself, no matter how false her courage felt. She had to make the leap, despite the fear. There was one other item that could not fit in Yennefer's bag. A long, elegant spear swung over her back that was as tall as she was. It had been hers for a few summers now, since she had begun helping Mefred and the others safeguard the Alamegans. She had yet to use it in anger, but her arms were strong and she could wallop just about every other Alamegan she went up against. Ralger knew what she could, much less would, learn about the art, but at least she could put her best foot forward. Yennefer took one last, long, deep breath before she made the final step out the door. The moment she did, a weight seemed to lift off her chest. The fear, the doubt, it all seemed to disappear. Replacing it was a swelling sense of freedom. The spring air felt crisper, the daylight warmer, the breeze more soothing. Everything felt new, in a way she couldn't describe but was somehow surrounded by. Deep down, she knew the pressure would return. Her mission was never one she could forget. But, for the first time since she was a child, Yennefer Fall felt free. Yen strode confidently to the center of the hamlet, where a small crowd had formed around the now parked carriage. It was a broad wooden vehicle, shaped almost like a boat, resting on great spoked wooden wheels and held slightly aloft by a great tan canvas balloon. Resting just before the carriage were 2 tired chocobo, the great golden birds chirping amusedly as they curled up on the ground and children rustled their feathers. The carriage's driver stood out like a sore thumb, his mustard yellow clothing a stark contrast to the dull greens and browns of gaggling Gridanians and assembled Alamegans. Just beyond the carriage, Yen could make out 2 diminutive figures stretching, presumably her fellow passengers. As Yen approached the crowd of onlookers, she at first went unnoticed, gently brushing through the throng. It didn't take long for her, or perhaps her spear, to be noticed. The reaction was nigh instantaneous, the Gridanians almost stumbling to get clear of the armed Alamegan. Before, she would have felt the sting of insult, but now all she felt was satisfaction. She was brazenly breaking the mold, and she wanted the whole hamlet, the whole damn star, to know it. Yen stopped just before the carriage master, who looked her up and down with a bemused look on his face. "Will ye be riding with us, miss?" The man trailed off leadingly, scratching at his short grey beard. "Fall," Yen replied with a nod. "And, where might you be headed, Miss Fall?" he asked. Yen gave him her most winning smile as she knocked on the haft of her spear. "Gridania," she beamed. "Can't you tell?"